Ohio Zero Waste. So one thing to know is that this is going to be recorded for posterity so future generations can know what great work we've done and what great work they can do in the world of composting. I do have everyone's cameras off and mics off so that I can present unabated. However, if you're not familiar with the webinar format, you will notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat function, which we're all kind of using so far, super cool. The other thing you'll see at the bottom is a Q&A. If you have any questions throughout this presentation, please use the Q&A function. My associate Maria will be monitoring it. And that way, any questions you have won't get lost in the shuffle of chat history, whatever. If I see my Q&A start to blow up a little bit, I'll probably pause and address some of them. But otherwise, there definitely will be time at the end for a more thorough Q&A. It is like 4 after. I know like over a dozen people signed up for this session. I might give them like 30 more seconds. But you know, we've got lives, so we're not going to do this forever. But I do want everyone to be sure to take advantage of this that wants to. While we're waiting for a moment, you'll also notice at the bottom there's the little raise hand function. Not sure how this will work with you not on the video, but do any of you currently compost or have you attempted composting? And will it let you raise your hand? So if you can raise your hand just to show me, oh, cool, it totally works. Yeah, so if you have any experience or history with composting, like let me know so I can kind of see what I'm working with here. Oh, I saw Emily and I saw Sarah for a moment. I guess those just don't last long, but cool. Oh, awesome, Melissa as well. Cool. So there's a little bit of knowledge out there, which is good. But the beautiful thing about this presentation is you can have all the knowledge or zero knowledge, and ideally it should still benefit you. All right, you guys, it is 5 after, my friends. We are gonna go ahead and get rocking and rolling. I'm going to share my screen. This one. Cool. All right, it's Appalachian Ohio Zero Waste Initiative presenting the DIY composting class. If you would like to make note of my email at the bottom of the screen here, feel free. You can use that to reach out to me in the future if you have any questions about composting or need any clarification or just want to talk about dirt in general. I enjoy all these things. First of all, what is compost anyways, and why should we even compost? Compost is absolutely a nutrient-rich, decayed organic matter formed through aerobic decomposition, and it is a resource that we get from what others might consider refuse. This will come up later, but just a little side factoid. 1 teaspoon of soil has 6 billion living organisms in it, which is just mind-boggling. And those little guys are going to do all the work for us in the composting business and help us along as we kind of help them along too. Some reasons that we should compost. Go away, little thing. It improves and enriches soil structure, increases the soil's ability to hold water and resist drought, which is, you know, good for the future we're looking at. And in general, it reduces waste and pollution going into the atmosphere. When we are composting correctly, we are using aerobic respiration in the presence of oxygen to break down materials. When it is happening in like a municipal landfill anaerobically without the presence of oxygen, it produces a tremendous amount of methane. And methane has 86 times the global warming effect of CO2. Municipal waste landfills are the 3rd largest source of human-related methane emissions. And the carbon footprint of the food waste is greater than that of the entire airline industry, which is completely mind-boggling. According to the EPA, if people would reduce the amount of food they're wasting and kind of like cut that out, we could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 6 to 8%, which is kind of astronomical and awesome when you think about it. There's 4 basic ingredients of a healthy compost pile. The nitrogens, which people refer to as the greens, carbons, aka the browns, water, and good oxygen. Nitrogens, which we called the greens again, are going to include things like fruit and veggie scraps, freshly cut green plant matter. The green plant matter is the important part. It needs to be green. Cut flowers, coffee grounds are a great source of nitrogen. You can even throw like the coffee filter in there, it'll break down just fine. Tea bags, with the caveat of most tea bags have a little staple by their little tag. You definitely want to make sure you get that out of there because you don't want little staples in your compost. Things like eggshells are great. They also add calcium to your plants. If you ever get like those weird black spots on the bottom of your tomatoes, that's generally blossom end rot, and adding a little calcium in there can really help turn that around. Nutshells and fruit pits are all great. I know they seem really hard, like this will never break down, but they decompose just fine. And then corn cobs and husks. Now with the corn cobs and corn husks, for it to be a nitrogen component, it needs to be the green husk or like the fresh corn cobs. Once it's all dried out, it's still useful, but you're getting into the more of the carbon range there. Now there are a litany of other things that would be considered nitrogens. Generally, they're going to be green and fresh, but this is a good start and some things that most of us kind of encounter in our day-to-day lives. The other component I mentioned was the browns. Things like dry leaves, which I will say with dry leaves, it is best to have them shredded. A lot of things in general that go into your compost, you want to have it kind of cut up or shredded as much as possible. Basically, by doing that, you're creating more surface area, which gives more areas for the microbes and things to kind of munch on, to kind of break it down. If you've ever been in like the forest and you kind of scrape up some of the leaf debris that's there, you'll notice there's like layers of like matted whole leaf. On their own, like not chopped up, leaves could take literally years to break down. They're a great brown component though. They also, back to the forest floor, like you scrape it up, you see a little bit of like white kind of veins running through there. Those are mycorrhizal networks. That means like the fungi are getting in there and they're really getting things going. And you know, that's how like all these nutrients get to where they need to go. So leaves are great, but like I said, you really want to like shred them up so that you're not getting like these dense mats. And also the dry leaves, they kind of, you can harvest them in abundance, you know, somewhat this time of year. Like they all kind of come at once, so you can kind of get them and hold on to them for a while if you can. As far as like shredding goes, running them over the lawnmower is probably about the easiest thing unless you got some other device. Twigs, which are another brown. And again, I want to put in the caveat of like cut these guys up. If you put large sticks in there, they could take a considerable amount of time to break down. I mean, they will eventually. Everything wants to decompose and break down. It's just the nature of things. But we want this to happen in a time frame that we can use it, ideally like the next planting season or something, and not wait eons to try to use it. Straw and dried grass clippings, just to like denote differently from green fresh grass clippings. The dried ones are the browns. To back up real fast, the greens and the nitrogens, like those are still like living intact, like cell walls full of water and things. Whereas the browns, again, they're dried out. With sawdust, something I will like, sawdust is great. It's really good at kind of like helping when you have like your pile's too moist or something like that. But you want to be careful with sawdust because you absolutely do not want to get like treated wood or like dust from treated wood and things like that. Just like we don't like to eat chemicals and put them in our body, the microbes don't either. And if you're feeding your microbes a bunch of weird chemicals, number one, you might kill them. And number two, if you're using this on like your vegetable gardening or something, like you don't want those things in your food that are going in your body either. So sawdust is great as long as you've got like clean, untreated wood sawdust. For the newspapers, another great source. You can shred them, you can even like wet them and throw them in there, kind of like in layers whole. You don't want to do like the whole like giant clump of Sunday paper just chucked in there because again, you want to create surface area for these microbes. Also avoid with the newspapers like the waxy plasticky inserts they have in there with like coupons and things. I personally also try to avoid the funny pages because of all the ink and things. That's black and white newspapers really the way to go. Cardboard is another great one. I actually like to try to keep the cardboard in like multi ways. Number one, if you're like just throwing cardboard into your compost pile, you want to shred it up. Again, back to the surface area thing to get it to break down. However, it is super helpful if you can actually acquire like a sheet of cardboard from somewhere to hold on to that kind of for like the end of your process, because it makes a great cover. We'll get into that in a little bit, but a large sheet of clean dry cardboard is super great for that. And then the final thing I'll put on there is the brown packing paper. I figured it's like the holiday times, people order stuff from places here and there, and sometimes you get that like brown paper in there that's kind of the cushion for stuff. As long as it's wax free, kind of plastic free, and it's like straight up just paper, it can be like shredded, torn up, and thrown in there as well. And again, just like with the greens, there are more browns out there than this, but this is like, I think, a good list of like things that are readily available to most people. Because ideally, like composting should be an asset to you. It shouldn't be like a thing where like I gotta go spend all this money on all these things. Like you don't. Like you're like spend money on your food and then use it to your advantage, like to the very end. All right, this next little list I have here are items that you would want to compost with caution. You absolutely can compost all of these things. Your meats, your dairies, your breads, your pastas, your oils, they all break down just like anything else. But the caveat is, if you were going to be introducing these items into your compost, you have to pay extra attention to it. I personally kind of like to pay extra attention to my plants and not so much to like my pile of compost. And that's the point of this, is like it can be done easily. Once you introduce these items, you've really got to watch things like temperature, because you want to get closer to that like 135, 150 degree range so that you can like kill any pathogens and things like that. Number two, the downside to all of these items is generally like the smells that they produce attract things we don't want to our compost, like little raccoons or possums or mice or rats, whatever. They are attracted to these smells because these are like high value caloric items. And so you're more likely to get pests in your compost pile introducing these things. If you live within the city of Athens, or like, I think it's Chillicothe, I'm sorry, that was wrong, Chauncey, or the Plains, you're within the range of the AHRC curbside composting program, which is super cool. They accept all of these items, and I'm going to get into why they're able to do that in a moment. I am from like Louisville, Kentucky, which I consider like a bigger place for sure, and we do not have curbside composting. I wish we did. It is like a super cool program, and now that I live here in Athens, it's a cool thing to really be a part of, just because I know the good that it's doing. And actually, more to the AHRC, their curbside program, you can get it in the city of Athens for as little as $6 a month to participate in that. They give you a bucket and you set it out with like your trash and recycling collection, and they come and get it and handle it from there. As you can see, like the Plains, Chauncey, Nelsonville, and Athens Township do have a higher price point right now. And from what I've gauged and from talking to them, it's all about density. Ideally, if more people sign on for the composting program and participate, they can afford as a company to lower that price and make it more affordable. But if you don't want to pay anything and you just want to like compost for the sake of composting to like keep it out of the landfill and help save the earth, you can drop it off yourself at 5991 Industrial Drive. They'll let you just chuck it straight in their pile. But again, you want to be a good steward and a good neighbor. So if you're taking it there, take proper compost and not the things they don't want to see. John Flynn is the current compost facility operator. I've got a little video prepared if I do this properly, and we're going to go check in with him and see what he's got for us.
with Athens Hocking Recycling Center, and I wanted to show you around the compost facility and talk to you about Athens curbside compost pickup. We pick up weekly on the trash day. If you're interested in signing up, you can sign up either through your water bill or through Athens Hocking Recycling Center directly. There's a small price difference if you are renting and don't have your own water bill. If you go through Athens directly, it's $8, and if you go through your water bill, it is $6. Good consumer compost looks like any organic material or paper towels. We can break down any biodegradable plastic bags, paper bags, pretty much anything that isn't plastic. Something that we want to look out for is the tags, like on your pineapple, water bottles, any plastics. We'll find like those bags that people take their dogs on walk with, and those aren't compostable, so I have to empty those bags. So it's probably good to keep those out if at all possible. And yeah, personal hygiene products are also a big one that nobody wants to touch. So our facility does take small amounts of meats, but something we're trying to avoid is bulk meats, and that's to avoid those pests coming in. The raw meat or cooked meat in bulk has a heavier smell, which will attract more animals into this facility. On any serviceware that's compostable, it'll say recycling symbol with a number 7 in it and PLA. That's how you know that it is compostable in an industrial compost facility. Any other plastics just don't break down. So when the compost comes here, we put it into a big pile, and this is kind of like a windrow system where we dump everything in, and then we put a biofiller on top of it to avoid any vermins or cats that might come in to eat it. And we layer the top and stir it regularly. The ideal temperature is around 140 degrees, and that'll get the microorganisms to break down all of that biomaterial. And then it sits, after we have stirred it in this system, over here in one of these bays for a few months with air blowers that blow air up to feed those microorganisms for about 3 to 4 months. And then we are fully broken down, and we take that compost and we put it through a screener, which is then available for sale to farmers or local consumers. If you have questions about what you can compost or how our facility is run, you can call Athens Hocking Recycling at 740-594-5312, or go to Athens Hocking Recycling website, or look up compost regulations on the Ohio EPA website.
Super cool. John Flynn's doing some good stuff over there. All right. Oh, back to the beginning. Very well then. All right, where were we? So John had mentioned there's some things that they get in their compost that they do not want to see, and they're kind of like a list of non-compostables. Some of these, like you're like, yeah, of course you can't. Like glass doesn't decompose in your compost, but you know, have them in there regardless, because some people just aren't sure what to put in there. Glass, metal, plastics, they do not break down in any reasonable amount of time. Definitely not like human lifetime, so they're not going to be good for us. When it comes to like your pets, like cat and dog food, for number one, is not a good thing to put in there. Cat and dog food is not held to the same standards as food that's fit for human consumption. So you risk introducing pathogens or something like that into your compost pile. The same thing goes for like cat and dog feces. Because of the food they eat and the things they do, you just run an increased risk of introducing some sort of pathogen into your compostable stuff that you do not want in there. Oh, sorry. Medicine is another thing, especially like antibiotics. Like the whole point of compost is we are trying to promote like biotic consumption and like organisms to like decompose our food and things. So things like antibiotics will just like straight up kill them, and you don't want to do that. Cigarette butts, I've seen that from time to time. People, they break down. They do not. Don't put them in there. Plus, they have all kinds of gross chemicals. I had never considered personal hygiene products as a thing until like John brought it up that it's a thing they get as a contaminant. I could only think that people are trying to like decompose like the cotton aspect of it, which cotton is fine, but anything that has like bodily fluids, you know, again, you're getting into like pathogen areas and you just want to avoid it. Compostable serviceware is kind of a tricky one. He mentioned like the forks and knives that are like compostable. They'll have a little sign on them that says compostable. Those are compostable in a municipal facility. You need a grinder to kind of break those up and to break them down before you throw them in the compost. And you know, that's not something most people have. So like AHRC, they are able to handle the compostable serviceware. Me as an at-home composter, I would not throw that in there. And that even goes for like, there's like the cardboardy, like Buddha bowls, whatever you want to call it, you get like food in. You can totally throw those in your compost. I personally, if you're gonna do that, would shred it as small as you can. But those kind of items are really intended for facilities and not at-home composting. And then the other like tricky caveat is like the biodegradable plastics. A lot of them are made from plant materials. And, you know, if you leave a cup of that, like a cup out in the sun, it kind of like starts to melt and break down on its own. However, I would not recommend putting biodegradable plastics or decompostable plastics in your actually at-home compost. It's hard when you're composting at home to make sure you're getting to these super high temperatures where this stuff is meant to break down. So you can end up with just little weird, like melted discs from a cup that's kind of like broken down, but not all the way. Like it'll start to get there, but it just won't get there all the way. So when you go to actually use your compost, you'll have like these weird chunky things in there. So in my opinion, it's best to kind of just leave those out and leave them to like the bigger facilities and the, you know, quote unquote experts. So when it's time to compost, it all comes down to location. Now, if you're in the actual city of Athens, there are a few regulations, if you will. Number one being it cannot be in your front yard, and it has to be with at least 5 feet away from your property line. If you happen to be viewing this and you're outside of the city of Athens area, I would just recommend to go to like your like local government website or whatever and see what kind of regulations they do have, just so you know you want to be a good neighbor and do this in a responsible way that you know you're trying to do good for the world, not like anger people or whatever. But when you get into composting, you have 3 basic like options. On the top left, you see the tumbler. To the right, a compost bin. I know this picture shows a cardboard box. Do not compost in a cardboard box. It'll quickly kind of break down and you're going to end up with a pile. But like pallets are great things to make boxes out of. T-posts with like chicken wire wrapped around them are great like things to make like bundles out of. I'm going to use the word piles a lot, but really like the things I'm saying about compost apply to all of these methods. Everyone's kind of got its pluses and its minuses. For example, the tumbler, you know, it's a higher startup cost. Like these things cost money. You can find them on Craigslist every now and then, like for a decent price, but for the most part, like it's a piece of hardware that costs money. The other drawback with the tumbler is it doesn't directly touch the ground or connect to the ground. I would highly recommend if you're doing compost to have it in contact with the ground. As I mentioned before, 6 billion microbes in a teaspoon of soil. Like there's so many things in there that want to break down and eat your stuff. You just need to like get them in touch with it. If you are going the tumbler route, I would absolutely recommend pitching a few handfuls of like dirt from like your garden or flower bed, or like some decent, like not clayey, like decent soil in there to basically kind of inoculate it. They do sell things to like speed up or to like boost your compost. But basically they're selling you the things that you can just find in a handful of dirt. So you can pay for it if you want, or you can just scoop up a handful of dirt and pitch it in there. The plus side to the tumbler is it's got that little screened in door and you're less likely to get larger pests. Clearly it doesn't keep out like fruit flies and things like that, but like the larger pests won't get in there. And it's easy to like stir because you just turn it. With the compost like bin, if you will, like the square bin, it could be a little more labor intensive than the tumbler as far as like turning it when the time comes to kind of turn and aerate your pile. An actual pile on the ground is probably the easiest thing to manage. Yeah, it can kind of like dissipate and spread out a little bit, but a garden rake pulls that right back together in no time. But I guess really, like I said, the main thing is like you want contact with the ground. And if you're using a method that doesn't give you direct contact with the ground, it's good to get a little dirt in there just to kind of like get that whole process going and get those microbes in. All right, building and manage your compost pile can be as labor intensive as you want, or pretty much as easy as you want. I've definitely spent seasons where I'm like checking on my compost every day and adding stuff to it, and you know, just really like hyper focusing on it. And then I've had seasons where I'm like, oh yeah, I have a compost pile, that's right. Not in the sense that like I'm definitely adding stuff to it, but in the sense of like, oh, I need to like treat this or take care of it a little bit. Because I mean, you kind of do, you kind of don't. Again, the basic thing is you want to like layer your browns and your greens. I've read some things that suggest like 2-part brown, 1-part green, which is perfectly fine, all the way down to like 50-50. I personally don't like keep track of like, oh, have I thrown this much green in? Have I thrown this much brown in or whatever? Like your pile will kind of let you know what you need to be doing. But the important thing is though, you never want to have like an overabundance of greens. Because as like those cell walls of those plants break down, they release water and you're getting like a big soppy, sludgy, gross conglomeration where your pile should be. So you really need to have those browns kind of like worked in there. But basically like start with the ground. If I'm doing a pile directly on the ground or even like on a pallet, I like to start with sticks. You can have like maybe like 1 to 2 foot sections of like small twigs and just spread them kind of out on the ground and start building on top of that. Number one, you've got that layer of brown you're starting with. Number two, it kind of allows for the pile to be like raised up just a little bit so oxygen can kind of get in there and aerobic decomposition can happen, which is what we're going for. And then from there, you're just kind of greening and browning all the way up. I feel like greens are the easier thing to like come by because it's your veggie scraps and things like that after your meals. You just pitch them out there. The browns can be kind of seasonal if you're going with like leaves and things like in grass cutting, things like that. Paper is like ubiquitous, I'm sure. But so like just making sure you keep a ratio good so you don't run into problems. And you probably can't see it because this weird bar on top of the screen that I can't get rid of, but on top of that last brown, it says cover. Generally a compost pile should be like, as far as like length and width, like anywhere from 3 by 3 feet to 5 foot by 5 foot, but you really don't want to get much bigger than that for an at-home personal like service because it's just going to get hard to manage. Now, John Flynn over at AHRC, he had those giant like windrow things, and those are cool for them because they have like skid steers and things that can help stir it. Also, he mentioned they have a system of like pipes that run under it that blow air up into it to keep the proper kind of like decomposition going on. If you want to do something that elaborate and figure something out, like knock yourself out and make a huge thing, But like I said, I try to keep it simple. I definitely try to keep it cheap and not too labor intensive. So keeping with those 3 foot by 3 foot to 5 foot by 5 foot is about as far as you want to get. And then as far as height, once it gets, I would say about like 3 foot tall, I generally don't go much higher than that. And once I get to that point, I'm gonna like cap it. And that's the thing you can't see because there's probably this bar on the screen, but it says cover. And that's where like that sheet of cardboard comes in. If you have a spare sheet of cardboard, once you're done throwing things on that pile, put that sheet of cardboard over it. And then, you know, that kind of puts that to bed because it does take a while before it's ready. Ideally, you can have a couple of spots kind of going. Like for me, I'd have like a 3-bin system. One bin is where I'm like actively throwing my stuff in, my daily veggie scraps or like the leaves or like the things I've clipped out of the garden, just throwing them straight in there. Another bin is the bin I'm going to use once that one's done and I got to keep composting, but I don't want to keep adding to that pile. And generally in my third bin, I just kind of stockpile browns sometimes because they kind of like keep and hold. And I feel like that could be like, for me anyways, the limiting factor. There's no shortage of like veggie scraps and things like that. But making sure I have an ample supply of brown is important. The other thing to consider, I mentioned that one of the components of healthy compost is water. The microbes and things that are doing that digestion and the work, they need oxygen and they need water to both survive and thrive. So as you're layering these things in there, especially if you're putting a lot of browns in there, it's a good idea just to like water a little bit. Ideally, like a healthy compost pile should have like the water consistency of like a well wrung out sponge. Like it's wet and it's like you touch it to your shirt, you get a little wet, but it's not like just sopping and soaking. So you do want that little bit of moisture in there. And having that like cover, which like I said, I like to use a sheet of cardboard. I've seen people use scrap tin or just like a layer of leaves or grass, like whatever the brown is, kind of a brown cover to like have it on there. It helps to hold the moisture in right a little bit to keep it off from like evaporating out. And it helps to keep like pests and things from digging in your pile. So as I mentioned, the microbes in action. The 3 types of microbes that are aiding in the digestion and decomposition of your compost pile. And they kind of come in phases. Like the psychrophiles come in first and they work at those lower temperatures of like the cool food. And they start digesting carbon and giving off heat. And as things warm up, it gets into like the 60 to 70 degree range. The mesophiles come in and they're doing like a majority of the work. They're like just chomping away at everything. Like they eat all the nitrogen and like they love the air and the water. And if you feed them, they'll really get it going. And that's when you start to get like your piles will get into that like steaming range where the thermophiles come in. These guys raise the temperatures up to like all the way to 155, which should kill any disease or organisms. It should kill any weed seeds in as little as a few days. Now, personally, I try to avoid, if there's weeds or things that have gone to seed, I personally try to avoid like throwing them in there because again, you really got to make sure you're getting that high temp before you kill it, or to kill it before you like put it in your garden, because you don't want to put compost in your garden and grow a bunch of like weeds or something. But like I've, squash scraps, tomato scraps, like I definitely throw seeds in there and have no issue. It's not like I, put a bunch of like tomato scraps in there and then plant my garden and all of a sudden I got a bunch of rogue tomatoes growing out. Like the heat generally kills that and it's not a problem. But if it doesn't get to that temperature or somebody survives, I'd rather have like a rogue tomato pop up somewhere than some rogue Bermuda grass or something crazy like that I'm going to like hate and fight. But I guess the basic thing is like, these are the guys that are working with us as our friends. And we're basically like, it's not really like creating compost. It's kind of like you got a little pet. You got some pet microbes and you're going to feed them and love them and take care of them. You just can't cuddle them really. So as far as like useful tools go to make the work a little easier, you don't really need many or any of these things, but they are helpful. Gardening shears are great to like cut those things into smaller pieces. Especially like I feel like every year at the end of the season, I'm turning my garden in for the winter, and there's like one random rogue zucchini or something that just managed to hide all season, and now he's the size of a small chihuahua, so I'm not going to eat them. You definitely want to make sure you get that guy cut up real good before you pitch them in your compost, or you're just going to like create a bunch of those. Garden rakes are great, especially with the pile method. Same thing with the garden hoe. If it starts to spread out, or like, you know, because it wants to decompose and like shrink down, but if it starts to spread out, you can kind of just scrape those edges back to the top, and you're basically turning your pile just like that. The pitchfork is great for that too, as well as for when it's time to like work and move your compost around. A watering can or a garden hose aren't really necessary. I feel like most people that are gardening have them, but you can literally just use a cup of water. It's the purpose of this is, like I said, you want to keep your compost pile semi like hydrated without being like soaking wet. Wheelbarrow is a little more expensive piece of equipment, but it's really great for when it's time to take your compost from your pile to your garden or wherever you're going to be using it. But anything works. A coffee can, 5-gallon bucket, whatever you want to use, any kind of vessel basically is what I'm getting at. And then the last one, the coffee can and sealable vessel. Not necessary, but I like to have something like that in my kitchen, especially this time of year when it gets dark at 3:30 in the afternoon and it's cold and can be like damp and rainy. This is a great opportunity, like, hey, I can throw my veggie scraps or my, you know, leftover food stuff from dinner in this little container and it can sit there. And then tomorrow when the sun's out and it feels warm and I can see what's going on, I can take it out and put in my compost pile then. Because for me, it's just, and I imagine a lot of people, it's not practical to like have to run out to your compost pile every time you produce every little scrap of anything or make coffee or make tea or whatever it may be. So having a little container on your countertop so that bugs don't get into it and the smells don't get out, kind of really like, it's a quality of life thing as far as composting goes, I guess. Now, here are some tips for troubleshooting your compost pile. I think one of the things that turns most people off from composting is they're worried about the negative issues that can arise. Things like soggy compost. Now, by nature, like I said, there's a bunch of like plant cell walls breaking down and water is going to be released. Like your nitrogens, like your greens, they're going to release water as they break down. And that produces like a dark leachate, which I forgot to add and mention. When you're setting up your compost pile, I would recommend not setting it on concrete. Number one, like I said, you want to be in contact with that dirt. And number two, you do get some like leachate and like liquid that leaks out from these things breaking down. And it's generally like a dark brown color. And if you have like, if you put this in your driveway or something or a concrete pad, it's going to like stain it and make it like black and brown and weird looking. And if you're cool with that, like do your thing, man. But I would avoid it. But anyways, if you have soggy compost, you know, maybe it's been a rainy season and like there's just too much water happening or whatever. Generally, the easiest thing to do with that is add some more browns. Your papers, your sawdust, your leaves, your dry grass, they're going to soak up some of that water and it's going to help balance that ratio out a little more so it's not as soggy and gross. Smelly compost, that generally means that you need more oxygen. When the compost is like smelly and kind of weird, there's generally anaerobic respiration taking place. And you're kind of smelling some of those methanes and things that we don't want. But generally just like it needs more oxygen. What's that mean? We're going to stir it. That's when you're going to kind of like get in there with your pitchfork or your garden rake or whatever and just kind of mix it around and pile it back up. Or if it's your compost tumbler, you're going to like turn it around. But yeah, add your browns in and mix it up a little bit. It should like solve that in no time. Like don't expect like, I just went out there 10 minutes ago and threw my browns in and mixed it. It still smells weird. Things take time, man. Give it a day or two, but you should remedy that. Cold compost is definitely a thing we do not want. As you saw again in John's video, like a little bit of steam comes out of your compost and that's more than all right. That is perfectly great. There is no risk of like your compost spontaneously combusting or anything like that. But those temperatures give off steam as like water and things evaporate. And so that's not happening and you have like cold compost. That means your like microbes aren't advancing and like growing and you're not getting the guys in there you need to get in there. So you probably need some more greens, aka some more nitrogen for them and some more like water for them to like consume and go because they want to like consume and reproduce like we all do. But they just need the materials to do it. So if your compost is cold and not heating up, you need to add some more nitrogen in there and kind of get it going. The big one that people are mostly drawn to is like the flies and other vermin. First of all, let me say, like, nature happens and nature is going to happen. Unless you've got a completely sealed vessel, you're not going to keep bugs out to some degree, and you're not going to keep like random little critters out. If you find a way to keep them all out, you're probably also keeping out oxygen, which means you're going to get like sludgy, weird stuff. But like I said, these things happen, but we can mitigate them. Generally, flies, especially fruit flies, are attracted to like fresh, sugary green matter. Fruit flies don't infest like sticks and paper and things like that. They want like the goods, they want that sugar. So it's just a good idea whenever you throw green, like your nitrogens, your green into your pile. I generally would throw a little brown on right away just to kind of cover it, whether it's like kicking a hand of sawdust over it, or even like throwing a little bit of dirt over it. Basically, just make sure those things that attract them aren't out in the open for them to get. I think John at HRC, he mentions they put like a biofiller over it. That's basically like a bunch of ground up browns, and they're covering it. And that generally takes care of those. But like I said, like things happen, they're going to come around. Like it's nature. Like you can't keep nature out of outside, and you shouldn't. So you're going to get things every now and then, but it should never get to the point where it's a nuisance and a problem. If it is, you just need to like give your compost pile a little love and care, and vis-a-vis some browns. So people ask me, when is my compost ready? The simple answer is, does it smell like dirt? If it smells like some healthy, fresh soil, then it's most likely ready. If it feels good, it's ready to use. It takes about 6 to 9 months of resting before it's ready, but it can be ready in as little as 6 weeks. That generally involves you like out there working it on the regular. You're probably putting in some kind of enhancer to kind of get it going faster. I've never really like needed my compost in 6 weeks. I generally will like compost throughout my gardening season, whatever. And then closer to like late fall, kind of put that compost pile to bed and then start a new pile with what's going on. Because that way, by like late spring, that pile I put to bed, if you will, in the fall should be about ready to be using. One of the great things about compost is it won't like burn up your plants if you put it right next to it. Like if you get fertilizers and things and put them right in next to your like little baby tomatoes or whatever, you can like literally like burn up the plant and like fry it. But with compost, that's not an issue. You can put compost. I mean, you don't want to pile it up around the stalk or the stem, because you just don't want to do that in general with things. But like putting compost around your plant is not detrimental to the law. It's incredibly beneficial. Now, if you have like some compost that maybe isn't like 100% ready, and you can see a little bit of particulates in there still, and it doesn't really seem like as dirt-like as it should be, you can still use that in your garden. Imagine, if you will, like 2 rows of plants, and then like the middle walkway between the rows. You can dig a little trench right there and throw some like unfinished compost in that trench and cover it over, and it'll continue to decompose and break down. And as it does, the roots of those plants will absorb those nutrients. Now, I wouldn't, like, you can, but I wouldn't just start like a fresh compost ditch in my garden. But if stuff's not done all the way, like, it is very easy just to like start that little like ditch and let it finish there. But yeah, generally 6 to 9 months, which isn't unheard of. And again, you're like saving money, because if you're going out and buying bags of compost to put in your yard or wherever, like that's a cost. Making compost is little to no cost besides the food you're already buying and eating. You're like using the things you already have to help yourself. So some practical uses of compost. You can mix it into your vegetable garden, just as I mentioned. Add it to your flower beds, or if you're like, I don't garden or flower, but I love my lawn and I got grass and I cut it and it's wonderful, spread it on your lawn. It'll make your grass a little greener. It'll help it hold moisture and water better, so you don't have to like water your lawn as much if that's a thing you do. And then the last thing, like, don't do anything with it if you don't want to. Like the fact that you're composting and keeping your food waste out of like a municipal landfill is great enough. Like just doing that is super awesome. And if you like, I don't have a garden and I don't water my and over hyper obsess about my lawn, or I don't have flower beds. I just want to keep food out of the trash. Cool, man. Do that. Let it sit where it's at. Like the ground will absorb it. Like I said, everything wants to decompose eventually, so it's gonna all like decompose. But even with that, like just doing that is so great for the environment. Like, please, like if nothing else, just compost, and that's super cool. And again, the perfect thing about compost is that it doesn't have to be perfect to be perfectly good compost. You can put as much time and energy into this as you want, or almost as little as you want, with a little asterisk of you have to do something. But compost is going to become compost. Like plants and materials are going to break down. The microbes are going to get to them, and they're going to do their thing, and it's going to be perfectly fine because it's going to have nutrients in it. I would kind of recommend not just making a mono culture, if you will, out of your compost. Like don't put in like, I'm just going to put in green vegetables and just leaves. Just like we like to eat a variety of foods, and that's good for us to give us a variety of nutrients, the compost also needs variety. And so having variety in your compost is giving a variety of nutrients to the microorganisms that are breaking it down, and in turn providing a variety of nutrients for your plants. All right, I'm going to thank my supporters, AmeriCorps, Real Action, the Sugar Bush Foundation, Athens Hawken Recycling, Appalachian Ohio Zero Waste Initiative, USDA, Serve Ohio, the litany of other people who I may have forgotten, who are all wonderful and beneficial. And I want to thank all of you all for attending, because without you all, I would just be talking to myself, and that makes me look crazy. I am going to open the floor to questions. If anyone has any questions that I can answer. If I get stumped, that's okay. That's a great opportunity for us to learn together. But please use the Q&A when possible. Oh, you guys, wait, before we get into the Q&A, I forgot to mention that there is a prize. This is the 4th class I've taught, and so this is the final one. We will be auto-generating a winner from the people that have registered. We are going to be raffling off this sweet countertop compostable container that comes with these really cool like charcoal filters, which keep out your fruit flies and reduce your smells. I just have like a little coffee can on my counter, but that thing's fancy. So just for being here, you have a chance to win something, so that's super cool. Yeah, again, so if you guys have any questions, I am more than happy to answer anything or figure out what I need to do. And if you totally like stump me and I have no idea, best believe I will get your information and I will find out and I will email you, because that means you just brought up something that I don't know, and I totally want to know everything. Also, don't be afraid. I feel like at least 90% of you I know, so we're all friends already. What you got? Yay, cute. Why limit the size of the compost pile? Really, it's about it being manageable. You do need to like aerate it and get some oxygen in there every now and then. And at some point you need to let it rest so you can use it. If you just like endlessly are throwing things in there into this behemoth mound, it's never like ready to use entirely because there's just a bunch of fresh stuff in there. And then when it comes time to like stir it or work it, it's just a lot to mess with. Like I said, at AHRC, they have those huge piles, and those are totally fine for them. They have skid steers. They can put the forks in and like lift it and like turn it. They have these giant pipes that go under it that blast oxygen into it to keep it aerated. But if you have a giant pile and you're not able to actually manage it and turn it at all or like mix it, you're gonna be creating a bunch of anaerobic respiration. So you're gonna be putting out a bunch of methane, and it's gonna kind of produce a sludgier material than the beautiful fine compost we want. I think like in a municipal landfill, a single head of like lettuce could take like 25 years to decompose. And you don't want your compost pile to take 25 years to be ready. So yeah, it's about, man, if you plan on using it at all, you just want to control the size. Number one, so you can manage it and use it. And then number two, so you're not just creating a bunch of anaerobic decomposition. What about wood ashes from wood stoves? What do you do with that? Cool, that's a great question. So you need to be cautious about putting too much straight ash on your compost, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's a little acidic and it can mess with your pH. But as far as like the little black, like charcoaly wood pieces that might be left after a fire, those are cool. That's a carbon source. If you have a layer of that on top, it's going to help with smells. And again, you have carbon in there. But that wood needs to be untreated, like natural wood, because you don't want a bunch of chemicals. And yeah, just like I would limit the amount of actual ash that I'm putting in there. But like charcoaly bits are super fine and great. I think they call it biochar. Is that right? Did you say that? Yeah. I believe I answered that. Anyone else? Oh man, something I totally did not mention, you guys. When throwing things into your compost pile, on the list of, not on the list of avoidables that I would definitely consider, or you should consider avoiding, is any kind of diseased or infested plants. Like when the squash beetles come in, or the vine borer, and they start just wrecking your yellow squash or whatever, I would not take those infested plants and throw them into my compost, because I don't want to infest my pile. I generally put those somewhere else. Or if there's like if I got a bunch of like blight or something going on that's really like wrecking some of my stuff, I wouldn't put those infected things into my compost pile. In theory, the high temperatures should get rid of all those things. However, if you don't get to those temperatures and you don't get rid of those things, then you're just putting infected compost in your garden, and you're gonna like infect all your stuff and kill it. And you're like, why? So yeah, avoid disease. Oh yeah, in case you all didn't notice, in the chat, Maria has I believe posted and put a little survey. It's like a 4-question survey. I need your data. So if you wouldn't mind filling out the survey and letting me know kind of like where you're from and such. Also, in the future, as we have additional classes about other recycling aspects, we can like let you guys know that like there's some cool stuff going on. Any more questions, anyone? Right on. Well, I want to thank you all again for coming out. I really appreciate having people to talk to. I am passionate about compost, as you can see. Oh, another question. Oh, just says great job. Thank you. I appreciate that. But I am passionate about compost, and I am passionate about the planet. So if you guys are want to rap about that kind of stuff, I'm totally cool for it. Is there another one? Oh. Awesome, man. Yeah, again, my email, shane@ruralaction.org. If you want to reach out to me for any additional questions or information. Good luck to everyone who participated. I kind of hope someone I know wins this, so I can ask you about how good it is. But at the same time, I hope anyone wins it, and someone will. So that's good. Thank you, Emily. I appreciate it. Thank you, Nicole. So Maria, Shannon Wells is unable to access the survey link. Do you have any information about that? No? Cool. Thanks, Maria. Let us know if that works, Shannon. Well, again, that's all I have today, you guys. I really appreciate everyone joining me. It's been a lot of fun sharing what I have with you and answering any questions I can. I look forward to seeing you all in the future. Good luck composting and gardening or whatever you're gonna do with your compost, or nothing with it, like I said. But thank you for like saving the planet and for joining us to do this good work. Y'all have a good evening, have a good night, and I look forward to seeing you all again. Bye.